affect nutritional outcomes among women and children in different regions in Uganda. Here we looked at how different ecological regions have their major crops they grow, but you find that they just grow and sell it elsewhere, and they're not really consumed in those areas. So we want to see how that affects the nutrition outcomes in the populations within those. Yeah, our data source will be the UDHS, the UNHS. These ones have, data on households consumption and all, so we'll get that from there. Then MAIF will give us data on the food crops, and then Ministry of Trade as well. A second question, how does the price or affordability of fortified foods, as well as the sales or quantity sold per region, affect the nutritional outcomes among women and children at different regions? So we're seeing how, the ones who are able, affordability in this case is, I'm looking at both affordability and accessibility of these foods. How is it affecting the nutritional outcomes among those people? Does it in any way affect? The question is yes, but how? And our sources, UNPS, that's from UBOS, UNBS, and Ministry of Trade as well. And our third question, how does the set storage standards for dry foods, the grains, affect nutrition outcomes among women and children at in the different regions? Set storage standards. You're supposed to adhere to certain standards when you're storing foods. The quality of your storage facilities, the warehouses. So this data, we're going to get it from Ministry of Trade. That is from particularly the Uganda Warehouse Receipt Systems Agency. MAIF will also help us, and then UNBS. Yes. Yes, UNBS regarding the standards, then MAIF, those foods. And then would regulation of grain milling standards improve nutritional outcomes in schools at the national level? Okay, this was sort of an hypothesis. Would regulation of maize or grain milling standards improve nutritional outcomes in schools at national level? We're looking at the school age going, brackets. And then the maize milling standards, we're looking at what we've been arguing about since yesterday, how, maize is milled and the nutrition component is discarded, and then we are only left with the less nutritious ones. So we're looking at a regulation put in place that will emphasize, grinding it all as a whole so that we don't lose out on. And then how is it going to affect nutrition outcomes? Because we're looking at mostly children in school who consume that. So we'll get some information from Gender, UBOS, MAIF, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education, and MTIC as well. And then how does the quality or safety of foods imported and locally produced affect nutritional outcomes at regional levels in Uganda? Quality and safety here, we're looking at how the foods were from the storage, the whole processing part, harvesting, storage, processing. Well, in storage, maybe we're looking at the grains, how dumping maybe could have led to the aflatoxins in the maize, maybe? And does it affect? Affect the nutrition outcomes. Okay, our data sources will be UNBS and Ministry of Trade. Thank you.
I think that is real trade. It's real trade. You can get to the questions. Okay, questions, feedback. Doctor.
I just wanted to to highlight on number 4, I think, that would do regulations of maize grain milling standards. And you know, this is a good question, but it's so far-fetched to the point that, you know, the standards on the milling, if you want to relate it to the quality of the grain, then we would say, the standards of the maize flour, for example, which comes out from there, would it have influence or impact on the nutritional outcome? But if you talk about the standards or the regulation of the machines themselves, along the way, the chain in the quality of the products from that machine can be affected by so many things, even along the storage. Okay, the way the maize is going to be prepared to make the food. So by the time you are going to blame that poor nutritional outcome on the maize, and yet you're not going to just eat that flour alone. That flour you are going to may have to eat with other things, which together will add up to form the nutritional outcome of that child or of that school-going children. Becomes very difficult to put hands on.
So yeah, thank you so much. Again, I think that was a great and a good question here. I have worked on information asymmetries before, basically like incomplete messages. And to begin with, I'm not saying that we can be able to do it here, but it's something really to think about. Do people know storage standards? Then how about the standards for maize milling? Do people know them? I think that's where I would need to start from. If what is known is different from the standards, that's an area that is very gray that needs to be understood within this country. So in other words, if you got the milling machines and you ask them, do you do this, do you do that, do you do that? And then it's, we don't know, I mean, but at the moment, we don't know how far that is from the standards. Equally the same with storage standards. So that's something that you can only be able to know if you have been able, if you've been made aware. And if you cannot, I suppose it would be very difficult to move it beyond the, to see the effect on nutrition before you even know whether people prefer to consume what is actually standard or what is below standard. I don't know. So it's like a whole pathway analysis that would be very interesting to venture into. We might not be able to do that because we don't have secondary data, but I thought that that's something that we need to pay a bit more attention.
The first one, how does production and sale of locally grown foods affect nutrition outcomes? One of your sources is the UNHS. I think maybe you can change that to the UNPS, because UNHS does not collect agriculture information. So production will not be possible, but the UNPS probably would give you something from that.
Thank you.
One more. I wanted to understand how we are going to assess quality. How does the quality stroke safety of foods, how we're going to measure that?
Thank you. Still under this decade is the decade of action for nutrition, which is 2016 to 2025, and there are some elements which we must do as a country. So I was just for information purposes that these questions which are framed for that section of trade, I wish we could see an element where we are putting some questions and answers related to food systems, and the food systems has 4 areas. That one I see that is there for production, which is okay, but we have the issue of food trade and marketing, and then finally the consumer demand. How do all of these affect the nutritional outcomes? When we look through the objectives of the decade of action, which is objective number 6, we are supposed to have trade for improved nutrition. So I think as we analyze, let us see what are those elements that we are looking at that will lead into improved nutritional outcomes, so that we don't limit our scope still, even if it is one question about how is it promoting the food systems for improved nutrition.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I also thank this group very much. I think
they have really brought questions that are tickling, really helping us to move towards nutrition. Now, I very much think that question number one, for heaven's sake, NIPN, take it over. It's a very big priority. People start selling maize when they are still in the gardens. You see what is happening in Kampala, you see what is happening across the borders, and at the end, they think they are getting money, and the children and women are malnourished. To me, that question is very, very good. You can find a way of refining it, but let us get that data. The issue of standards. The Public Health Act in this country is not well known to most of us. The Public Health Act has got many standards on foods. How, for instance, when it comes to milling, do you know that somebody, I think from gender, told us in one meeting that you people, do you know you are sitting on a time bomb? Most of the maize that is ground actually goes back with some metals, so there should be standards for what kind of mills, what kind of machines. The standard over the machine, of course, where maize is milled and the part of the machine enters into the maize is already a poor standard as far as the machines are concerned. In Kenya here, we have a special policy on how maize should be milled for school children. For us here in Uganda, some schools have their own local mills, they mill their own, others get the fortified, others get the highly, So I think even that one is a very, very good question for us, for which we think NIPN should take on board.
Thank you so much. I think you highlight very important points as points of emphasis. It's actually true. There's when sugar was put on the market and someone throws in a magnet, it comes out with metal particles. A magnet in sugar, it picks out the metals. That shows the quality of milling and all that. Can we do education as we conclude?
For education, we came up with three major policy questions. The first was, what's the trend of school enrollment rates in schools implementing school feeding programs? Now realize that school feeding is the major activity or program that would fall into from pre-primary right up to secondary level. So this goes all the way. So the sources are IMIS and Uganda Multi-Sector Food and Security Nutrition Program. This project is helping to implement the school feeding program in some of the regions of the country. And it has most of this data, that's why we recommended it. Then the second is, what is that? Okay, for enrollment rates, you could replace it with completion or retention, which is majorly performance rates. Then what is the trend of pass rates in schools implementing school feeding programs? And UNEB could help us, and IMIS. Then what's the nutrient composition of food prepared in schools? We have the school feeding guidelines, which guidelines were signed by the then Minister of Education in 2010. So we want to know if schools are actually if they're actually providing meals that are rich in the nutrients put down in the school feeding guidelines. Yeah.
So interestingly, things about food, school feeding are strongly coming through. Questions?
I will thank you very much. Just still for information, the Uganda Vision 2040 provides a statement that the education sector will provide a policy on school feeding, which is still unanswered. So as we design policy issues, I hope we shall answer that in the future. Number two, in the NDP2, the sector is supposed to provide information on the performance, on the percentage of schools which are implementing the school feeding program, and also the number of children. I see you have mentioned it. Then number 3, in the education sector strategic plan of 2017-2020, it is a requirement that one of the policy questions is answered, and this is the question: what is the contribution of school feeding on the educational outcomes? I hope there is a way that one is being tackled, but we need to be very clear on which outcomes are directly related to nutrition, because all of them are not related to nutrition. And then I want to make a correction on the date of the guideline. That guideline was approved in 2013 after the UNEP was made in 2011. Thank you very much.
I'm looking at, there are only 3 questions, right? Okay. So I see from NIPN perspective, the first and 2 can be merged in one, because we are trying to look at the trend of, one is for a school enrollment rate and one is for performance or pass rate, I guess, no? So, but we are looking at, again, in those schools which are implementing a school feeding program. So basically we are looking at 2 trends. So we can merge those 2 if it's not like, very heavy indicators. I'm not sure how it's done. But the third question for me might not be answered through NIPN, with the assumption that you are talking about what is the nutrient composition of food prepared in school. Now, if the data is collected for the composition of food item to make food at a school, then we can look at the composition. But then looking at the composition might not answer, what are you trying to answer? Just looking at the composition, what does it mean? Would it have any implication on the nutrition outcomes of the children, or would it have implication on, again, improving those, the enrollment rate or the performance rate? Then it does matter. Otherwise, just like, that is very, descriptive kind of information that you want to see. I don't see the relation where you want to, make that relation with. So, yeah.
The policy issue now at hand for education sector is that 66% of the children go to school hungry. So I hope you will link to ensure that those questions strictly, at least they are trying to be able to answer that. Otherwise, having the food commission per se will not answer the problem why they are going to school hungry.
Yes, I think the point which comes with number 3 is almost similar to the question that was coming from the gender group. The implementation of those guidelines is the issue. Maybe as we refine that question from the NIPN SCORE team, would look at the implementation of these guidelines and what could be happening. We could look at it from that perspective.
By nutrient composition, I thought when we talked of the super refining, the iron-rich beans, my question comes to, do all schools have, because I've been to the storage when we had primary schools, when the beans are past stage, but we keep on feeding them because you store them. You come to primary, like 3rd term, you store the whole thing. Whether they are weaved, whether you have sprayed them, these children how to feed because you can't throw away the beans. Can't that be a content on that? Do you just feed the beans because they're in the storage, or you can have somebody to regulate and say that these beans are past? It can't be 6 months storage and I'm still feeding on them.
I think the bottom line, the discussion here, is whether that can be answered with existing data or not, or we need to collect data and do data gap filling. So I think these are the decisions that we have to make as we refine this, because as it stands now, establishing the nutrient composition of the food, it would mean testing the foods that are being consumed in schools, either through laboratory or whatever means. But we are saying now, if we look at it from a policy level, is this policy being enforced to ensure that the guidelines are being followed? That would look at it from that angle. But in future, we could consider looking at some of the issues you raise.
Yeah, thank you so much. I thank the group very much. And I think as has been advised, if we have 1 and 2 married, getting us together, then I would like to ask the NIPN group. We have had a lot of research carried out. I was telling the team that there was one which was commissioned even by the president himself on school feeding as a source of information. Can we refer to some of the researches on those relevant areas? So I think we need, like we have had one from World Vision, we had one which was done by UNATU under the Uganda National Teachers Association. It will help so much on that. Now there is also the great problem of, you see the policy is that parents should be the ones to provide the food. And we've had several initiatives that are actually bringing parents on board. And where parents on board, the chances of the children to feed is higher. Can we have a question surrounding those enablers